Yeah, great. So thank you, Rodrigo, for agreeing to participate in this interviewing series. I'm sure that many of the future faculty candidates will appreciate your experience. Perhaps you can start by you introducing yourself first in a couple of sentences. So what's your background? Where are you from? Where did you do your PhD? What are you doing now? And yeah.
Right. So hi, everyone. So thank you, Manuel, for the invitation. So my name is Rodrigo. I did my PhD in Technical University of Lisbon. My PhD was around garbage collection and JVMs, so mostly about managed language runtimes. After finishing my PhD, I went for ETH in Zurich. I did a postdoc there, working under Professor Gustavo Alonso. After finishing this postdoc, it was around 1.5 years, I transitioned to Oracle Labs in Zurich. I was working with the GraalVM team, still working for managed runtimes. And then I consolidated with that position. I became an invited assistant professor in the University of Lisbon. And now I just recently became an assistant professor as of 1st of June, so a couple of days. So most of my work is about managed runtimes, and this kind of grabs a little bit of systems, grabs a little bit of programming languages. Recently, I've been mostly focused on managed runtimes executing in cloud environments, and this goes for microservices, serverless, and I think there is a lot of things to be done in this area. So I've spent quite a bit of time working on that area. I also do some work on anything that revolves around parallel and distributed systems, operating systems, and so on. But this is mostly my research right now.
Can you perhaps briefly tell us a little bit more about the institution that you will joining? So what's especially the relationship to the University of Lisbon?
So in Portugal, there are a couple of, I would say, main universities for CS. I think University of Lisbon, University of Lisbon has different schools. Technico is one of these schools. It's a school dedicated to engineering. I think it has a very strong CS department, and inside this department, they have several research groups. So this is, I think, one of the strongest universities in Portugal. And for CS, I think this is definitely, maybe I'm biased, but I really like the CS department. I think they have a very strong people, and I think this is a very cool place to do research. And this is why I applied. And I joined very recently this CS department, and I'm actually joining a group that is mostly dedicated to doing systems research.
Actually, I haven't heard of this invited assistant professor position before. Did you mention at the beginning? So can you tell us like how this differs from a normal assistant professor position and how you were able to get this one?
So an invited assistant professor is basically an assistant professor that is not on the tenure track. And this also allows you to have, you might not be 100% of the time dedicated to this position. So this was my case. I was working at Oracle Labs as a researcher and assistant professor, invited assistant professor at the same time. So it allows you to consolidate an industry position at the same time. And this was something that I was approached by the university about if I would be interested in having this position. And I told, I'm still working at Oracle, and they told me that I would be able to consolidate working both places at the same time. So I guess this is the main difference, is that one, it's not a tenure track, and second, you can consolidate with other positions outside.
That's good to know.
So responsibility-wise, it's basically the same thing. So you have to teach, you have to work with students. The department might not be put you in charge of any course because you might have a reduced percentage time-wise for working in university. But other than that, it's pretty much similar to a normal assistant professor position.
Okay, that sounds challenging to balance. So how did you do that?
Yeah, this was an interesting learning experience. So on one side, it's the normal tasks of university and professor and working with students. And on the other side, I had research projects ongoing with Oracle. Well, but to be honest, I also worked with students on the Oracle side, and I had projects. So most of the time, I would face them as a project that is not hosted in the university, but hosted in a company. So while I was at Oracle, and I'm still heavily working with them, I mostly work in projects, and these projects, most of the time, or all of the time, they're research projects. And I mean, working for this project is very, very similar to working in a project in academia. So this is a research lab in Oracle. They still want to produce papers. The difference is that they have a higher focus on things that can actually materialize and produce systems that can be used by other people. So they have a higher focus on the results side, and if they can actually sustain these results in production. But other than that, this is a research project. So I kind of had research projects in university, research project in Oracle, and then I had to do some teaching as well. So it was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun, and it was an interesting experience to learn from.
Okay, great. Yeah. Also sounds a bit like a win-win situation, because the company profits through the students that you can attract, right? And also the university, I guess, benefits a bit through the funding or so.
Yes, so yes, exactly. This was a very kind of a symbiosis, in the sense that we can kind of get access to students and get the students working things that Oracle is interested in, and at the same time we can get budget from Oracle, and this was actually the case. So right now I'm becoming an assistant professor in the University of Lisbon, and some of the projects that I was working at Oracle are now being funded by Oracle, and I need to find students in university, and these students will be funded by Oracle to continue basically the projects that I was working in. So this is a very interesting situation where you can, when you transition from industry, especially if it's a research lab, into the university, you can kind of carry over your projects, and some of the funding goes with you. So this was actually a very interesting transition. Yeah, so I'm now in the process of seeking out students to continue these research projects, actually.
Okay, I see. Yeah, awesome that it worked out like this.
Yes, it was actually a very, very interesting experience. And I mean, maybe this works out in other labs. I was lucky that in Oracle labs, they have a very strong culture around research. And I mean, most of them, or many of them, were actually PhD students, so they know more or less this process of doing research. And they still want to dedicate time to contribute back to the community and write papers and produce things that can be used by other researchers. So I think this is very valuable.
I see. Yeah, let's perhaps change to another topic, namely the academic system in Portugal. So can you give us perhaps a brief overview of the academic system? Is it like similar to the, let's say, the US kind of system, or how would you describe it?
So the academic, so maybe, what do you mean by academic system? Can you?
For example, the positions that you typically have, this also the tenure track system.
Right. Okay, yes, so this is similar to other universities in other places. So there is a tenure track. There is this first 5-year period that you get this kind of initial part of your tenure track, and after that you become part of the university, and eventually you have different levels of professorship until you become a full professor. So the starting level is an assistant professor, then you become associate professor after some time, and after you do some additional work and well, you have to do some extra work and application process to become an associate professor, and then eventually you become a full professor. So I think this is more or less in line with other universities.
Right, yeah. And in terms of student funding, so is it that you have to externally fund all of your students, or like, for example, similar to the German and Swiss universities, that you have some guaranteed funding for a number of students?
So it's different. So you have to externally fund all of your students, and this is actually one of the main tasks of a professor, is to actually seek out funding. So in Portugal, there is this national foundation for science, similar to what they had in the US, for example, where you would apply to get funding and this would be the funding that would allow PhD students and master students to work and postdocs. So you create these projects, and you apply with these projects to national funds, and if you get them, then you have like this big budget that you can use for several years, and you can grab this funding and put it towards some students. Same thing goes for European projects. This is a larger effort and maybe involving some other parties, but typically professors will apply for national funds and European funds, and then from this budget, this would be used to have some students working with them.
Yeah, one thing that I was also wondering about, because many universities typically avoid to hire their own PhD students, and you did your PhD at the Technico. So
Yes.
was this ever something that came up, for example, during the interviewing process as a potential obstacle or so, or was this always okay for the university?
Right. So maybe let me start by going just a bit back. So when I was around the 3rd to 4th year of my PhD, I was more or less sure that I wanted to do research, and I wanted to stay in Portugal. So if you match these two restrictions in Portugal, this would point towards staying in academia, because I mean there is not a lot of companies doing cool research in systems. Well, maybe this has changed in recent years. But this was my feeling at the time. It's like, okay, I want to go back to academia, and academia, I would like to stay in Technic because maybe this is the right place. And I approached one of the professors in charge of hiring in university, and I was very open about it and said, well, if I want to apply back to Technico, how is my CV looking? Is there any chance? And basically what I got from him is basically, well, your CV would be greatly improved if you go to the outside, stay a couple of years abroad doing research, either in industry or in a university. And then when you're ready, decide to come back, and then your CV will probably be greatly improved. So this is kind of I wouldn't call it a drawback, because it turned out to be a very, very good experience going abroad and being in ETH, and then going to Oracle Labs. But it required me to have like a detour after my PhD, go abroad, learn more, do research with other people, and then come back. Yeah, but a fun fact is that I was not aware of this until I was at ETH. And when I was at ETH, while talking with other PhDs and postdocs, that I learned that this was kind of something that was many universities frown upon, hiring their own PhDs. But in Technic, this happened. There are a lot of professors that actually got their PhDs from Technic as well. Maybe this was something that happened many years ago. I noticed that recently they're mostly hiring people that either graduated from a different university or spent significant time outside doing research.
I see. Yeah, I guess that's then also a useful tip for future candidates, right? If you want to get a position at your own university, also go outside for a couple of years and prove yourself there, so you have basically better chances back at home.
Yes, and it's a very good learning experience. So one of the things that I learned is that when you're in a research group, I mean, you do research and you work with 1, 2, maybe 3 professors in the research group. But when you move to a different research group, this is a completely new set of people that you're working with. And this comes with a lot of new, interesting learning experiences. Like this goes from tricks on how to write papers, how to address, I mean, just giving a couple of examples, like how to write a good rebuttal to a paper, how to address a presentation, and so on. So you learn a lot of things by talking to more people, talking to more researchers. And in my case, I think I learned a lot going to ETH. ETH has a lot of bright people, and I was very fortunate to working with a lot of them. And I feel that I learned a lot. So if a PhD student finishes and still has, I mean, this depends on person to person, but if you're able to spend a couple of more years, go to a different university and work with different set of people, maybe even in a different area, this will highly contribute to you as a researcher.
Yeah, I can very much relate to this. So yeah, can you perhaps give us a general overview of the timeline and the interviewing process itself?
Yes. So this the first part of the process was basically there was a scouting process going on in Technical University of Lisbon. So I basically reached out to the university and said, well, I'm interested in applying. How does this work? And I was told that, well, there is this application right now. This is for scouting, and you should apply. At this point, I already had to prepare a research statement and a teaching statement, along with my CV and relevant papers and so on. From the scouting process, after the scouting process, I got an invitation for an interview. So this was just to put things in a timeline. So this was February 2020. So January 2020 was the scouting application. 1 month after, I got an invitation for an interview. I went to the university, and this was a more or less standard interview. It's a one-day thing. We talk, I had meetings with several professors in the CS department, basically asking about my research, what I want to do, and so on. And then there was a lunch break. During this lunch, so this was a CS meeting that they do over lunches, and then after lunch, there is usually a talk. In this particular day, I was giving the talk. This was my job talk. And this was mostly about my research, what I plan to do in future. And then after lunch, I continued having meetings with other CS professors. So this was my interview day, and this was in February. Then a couple of months after, I received the notification that the scouting process determined that they would be opening a position in the University of Lisbon, and they would open an application process, and I would have to apply, or in this case, reapply to the position. But this got delayed for many months. So actually, the position only opened in December. So this was from February to December. The pandemics kicked in, and all these bureaucratic processes in Lisbon got delayed quite a while. And only in December, this application process for the position of assistant professor started. I applied, and this took 3 more months. So I got the answer in February. So actually one year after my interview, I received a positive answer. And since then I started 4 months after, so in June, so from February to June. So in total, this took 1 year and almost a half from the moment I decided that I wanted to apply until I got a position. So this was a very, very long process. Yeah, I usually joke with people that you almost need to be insane to wait this amount of time for a position. But I learned from other colleagues that it's not uncommon that these processes take time. So it can extend to several months until we get the replies.
Yeah, especially with the pandemic going on and everything. So yeah.
Yes. I mean, this took forever. Yes.
Yeah, let's perhaps dig a little bit more into the process. So, for example, one important part of the application package is to have these recommendation letters, or at least references, like people that write these recommendation letters for you. So, how did you approach your letter writers, and what was your feeling about this?
So yes, so in my particular case, they required three letters. I basically approached my PhD advisor. This was kind of an obvious pick, because I mean, this was the researcher that I have worked the longest time. And then as a second option, I asked Professor Gustavo Alonso. This was my mentor at TTH. And then I had to pick a third, and I picked another professor in ETH that I have also worked with quite a while. So I mean, this was the professor that I used to work the most. This was more or less, I was very comfortable with them, and they knew about my process. They knew that I was working for this position, and I think this is also good. I mean, they also want to write a good recommendation letter, at least in my understanding, because they want to see you succeed. See, if you work with them, they also want you to succeed. So this is kind of a good thing if you get the position for them as well. For the other professors that you maybe work in a project, writing papers and so on, I mean, this is something that this will cost them time. So I was trying to be very polite and ask if they would have the time to write this recommendation letter. But I didn't get any problems, and I was also, I mean, this particular professor was very polite and was very nice and said, well, obviously I'll write you, and I think you'll do great and so on. So I didn't have any problems, and it turned out to be actually very good.
I see. And was the Technico the only institution you applied for, or did you also apply for other institutions within Portugal or outside?
Yes, so actually no. So maybe my case should not be used as an example. So I was more or less confident that I wanted to go into to be joining Technico. I didn't apply to other universities. I was more or less comfortable at Oracle, and my feeling was, well, if this application doesn't pan out, then I'll start sending applications to other universities, potentially even abroad, outside Portugal. But at that point, and then I got invited senior professor, I was more or less comfortable in, if I have to wait, then I'll wait a little bit longer. I'll just wait to see if this application goes through. So no, but I mean, maybe this was not the best approach to the problem. Having more applications would definitely have increased. If this application didn't pan out, then I would have a second option and it wouldn't have to wait such a long time.
I see, but lucky that everything worked out well, so it seems to have been the right move. And how did you prepare for the job talk and interviews in general? What kind of strategies did you use there?
Yes, so for the job talk, so this was kind of a presentation that describes your research. And I tried, so I was advised by Professor Gustavo Alonso, and he gave me like very, very great advice, many great advices on how to do this. And basically, this was a talk that is kind of a broader level kind of overview of your research. It kind of goes over different areas, and you try to give a story that kind of links all of your recent work and kind of gives it a motion forward and says, well, this is what I want to do in future. It's kind of, you see this trend of these works, they are building up to this long-term goal. So I prepared this presentation. This is a standard 20 to 30 minute presentation, if I'm not mistaken. Then I did a couple of dry runs for the research group I was in. This was also very important to get the feeling of what people understood the best, what parts of the presentation was kind of, or would need to be improved. So yeah, so I think I had 2 rounds or 3 rounds of internal reviewing of the presentation. So I did the presentation a couple of times, and then the final was in the job talk. For the interviews themselves, I mean, I tried to prepare in the sense of thinking about potential questions about my research direction and what I wanted to do next. Obviously, this is something that is very hard to predict because you're talking with many people, and many people from different backgrounds will ask you different things. But I tried to prepare for different angles of questions. Another thing that is sometimes important to have in mind is that they will ask you if you have any questions. And it's also interesting, I mean, if you have the time, and particularly if you know the schedule ahead of time, and you can, if you know the professor that you will be talking to, this allows you to do some kind of background check and see what areas they work in, and this will allow you to discover some potential connections between your work and them and their work, and this can drive the conversation. And this will be much easier if you more or less know the points of contact, and maybe even discuss new ideas, new things that are coming up. So this was kind of my preparation. Yeah, for these interviews, I mean, they will ask you about your research, and then you can throw questions back. I remember that some of the things that I asked was more or less how easy is it to work with students in university? How easy to get funding as an applicant for a position? I think it's very important to know if there is easy access to funds or not, if students are easy to get around, or if it's very difficult to get PhD students. Because I mean, if you accept the position, then in order to progress in your research, you will need students eventually. and it's a very good data point for you to know if it's going to be easy or not to get access to students, at least in my point of view. So I remember that this was one of the questions that I asked a couple of times.
That's a very valuable insight. So thanks for sharing this. I mean, you already mentioned that different people ask different kinds of questions, but I was still wondering, was it like mostly, let's say, questions about your research or about how you will manage students, attract funding and so on? Was there any kind of pattern or common questions?
Yeah, so it was kind of a mix of both. I would say maybe most questions were about how do I want to conduct my research, if I had any ideas for new courses as well, if there are any courses that need some updating, or if I have new ideas for new courses. But then, yeah, so they also mentioned, okay, do you have any ideas on how to get funding and so on? But as we were discussing, in Portugal, a lot of the funding comes from national funds. So, I mean, most professors will apply every year with new projects to these national funds. So the question on how do you get funding is going to be the same for most professors. In my case, I had one advantage, which was I have funding from Oracle Labs. So whenever this question popped up, I'd say, well, yes, I will apply to national funds, but for now, to start, I have funding from Oracle. They will be funding a number of students after I join. So this will be my initial startup. And then I will obviously write proposals for funding in the years to come.
Makes sense. Okay. Do you have any kind of suggestions what you would have done differently during the interviewing process, or any kind of experience that stuck with you?
I mean, interviewing process-wise, maybe I would have done a little bit more background check. So the thing that I was suggesting, I think I didn't do it enough. So sometimes you can run out of questions, or maybe if you want to avoid these awkward moments where you're kind of thinking back of your mind, what could I ask to continue the conversation? Maybe I would have done a little bit more of that. And this will just prepare you to have more things in the bag if you need to continue the conversation. Do a little bit more homework. Yeah, I think mostly that. But I think in my case, I was particularly lucky. I think the interview went well. But yeah, a little bit more homework would not have hurt.
Yeah, it's very relatable. So for me, it's also, I always ask myself like whether I should invest more time or not, because yeah, I guess you can also just invest an infinite amount of time into reading papers and so on, right? So
yes, yeah. I mean, it is fair not to know things, because I mean, there is, as you mentioned, there is an infinite, virtually infinite amount of papers and amount of things that you can research, and there is only a limited amount of time to get there. But I mean, I think they will understand. The professors, they know, and they understand that you are on the spot at that moment. So maybe you're not performing at your normal levels when you are sitting comfortably in your chair doing research. So I think this is fair to assume.
yeah, so once you received the offer, like did they give you some kind of decision deadline, and how did you proceed after that? Did you, for example, try to negotiate some stuff, or did you wait until you accepted the offer?
So in my particular case, in Portugal, I believe it's actually in Portugal. After you apply, you get a response, and this response is either you accept it or you're not. So I don't think you have the option to negotiate anything. For example, salary, it's a fixed amount. There is a public table that describes the salary of professors in public universities. So there is not much to negotiate there. I actually didn't think twice. So this was the position that I wanted. When I got the response, I just said, well, yes, let's go with it. This is still a long process to actually become and start as a professor. So I just started it as soon as possible. So no, I didn't negotiate. And I didn't try to wait for other university because I didn't apply to any other. So this was my only pick, and I decided to go with it.
I see. And were you in a two-party situation or something? So did you have a spouse that did a job, or was this also not a concern?
So this was mostly a concern to stay in Portugal. So this was already my my restriction sets when I decided to apply to Portugal. So this I did at the time I received the answer, I didn't have this situation because I was already in Portugal.
Let's perhaps step back again and slowly wrap up. One thing that I still wanted to ask you is like, what kind of role did mentors play in your process? So for example, your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor, and perhaps some other mentors.
So I think they have a very important role, and I think I was very fortunate to work with the people that I worked with. So they always had, and starting with my PhD advisor, I mean, I was advised by Professor Paul Ferreira, he's currently in Oslo. At the time, he was obviously in the University of Lisbon, and he always had a very positive attitude and always fostering research and waiting for me to improve as a researcher and giving me advice and giving me hints and so on. So I learned a lot from him. I think this was very good. I was very fortunate. Then I went to ETH and worked with Professor Gustavo Alonso. And again, this was a whole new learning curve. I learned a lot of things. And he was also very important to motivate and to give good feedback. I learned a lot from Gustavo. A lot of tips on how to do presentations, on how to write papers, how to address research questions, and so on. So I feel that mentors have a very important role, and sometimes students get out of their PhD and they run to industry, and part of the problem is that maybe they didn't have a nice experience with their mentors. Maybe they were not very satisfied with how research went, or maybe this seemed like a very boring process, the process of researching and writing papers and so on. I actually had a very good time, and if I would have given the chance, I would do it all over again. I think the idea of coming up with ideas and drafting systems and writing papers, this is all very good, and this was something that was brought to me by both mentors. So I think they did a very good job. I got convinced.
Okay, that sounds good. And do you have any kind of final advice or suggestions to future faculty candidates?
I think maybe the first thing is keep in mind this is a very long process. In my case, it was maybe too long, but this will be long anyway. And maybe the second one would be trying to come up with a reasonable story for our research. I think this is very important. This was one of the things that I spent most time before starting the whole process, like what I want to do with my research and what I want to do next, and how all the work that I've done so far will kind of come together in an idea to move forward research and so on. So this is something that it takes some time, but if you get it right, then you can use it for most applications and you can write a nice research statement. And I think if you get it right, this will carry over a lot. This will bring you great benefits and help with the recruiting process. Maybe this would be my 2 cents.
Thanks a lot, Rodrigo, for all these valuable insights and sharing your experience. And yeah, I'm sure that future faculty candidates will greatly appreciate them.
Right. Thank you. It was my pleasure.